This is Ray Shackleford,
And I'm Eddie Young Ovote.
and welcome to
Fresh Perspective.
This is our brand new show. We talk about things to bring us together across the diaspora, specifically in the civic space, community, socially, all in the effort to bring us together. And today we're joined by Fatima. She has a startup. She is an entrepreneur called SA in Sege.
Yes, I say Sege, yes.
And it focuses on soft policy, helping those countries to move things forward in a different fashion.
Right.
And we're going to learn more about that today. So if you would just kind of tell us about yourself, where you're from, your background. I know you have that HBCU affiliation we found out. So we definitely want to out that. But just introduce yourself to the audience and then we'll kick off the conversation from there.
Hi, my name is Fatima Menifee. I graduated from Texas Southern University.
Ooh, go Tigers!
My bachelor's degree in
Shout
public
out to
affairs and sociology from TSU. I am a Cameroonian American. So mom is from Cameroon and dad is from the good old Republic of Texas. Lone Star State. My startup is actually based in Seoul, South Korea, and here in Houston. And it is based on this idea of soft power. So what we do is we help African countries with their brand, soft power in Asia. So this idea of working in an uninterrupted space. So I'm sure you viewers all know the Americas will be interrupted, right, because of colonialism and war. But in Asia and Africa, we have never had anything that traumatic. Matter of fact, our last major interaction that influenced the rest of the world to today would be the Silk Road trade. And that did not take place with violence. That took place with cultural diplomacy. That took place with art, music, mathematics, and science.
Absolutely. So, digging a little bit further, I know you spoke to, your father, your mother, that influence. How did you get to a point where you created this startup? Because, when we were looking at your background, I was like, this is very interesting.
Yeah.
It's not something that we see every day. And so it was just like, how did you get to that point where you were really interested in diplomacy, policy, and ended up at the School of London, things like that? I just feel like that's very fascinating. I want to give them more insight into that.
All this credit goes to the many people at some point in time that had to raise me up. I'm really the walking example of it takes a village to raise a child. So my granduncle, Namanke Gangi, he was in charge of the World Food Program. He was a deputy director there. When I was little, he said something to me. I made a comment about how do you go to all these countries? Everyone speaks English. And then he just looked at me really sternly and he said, everyone doesn't speak English. You need to learn something else apart from English. Then he told me about the United Nations as this organization where all these countries come together and they work towards a goal. And I was just like, my mind was just completely blown. So I would look at his passport and there wasn't a country he's not visited, right? So it was just like, from that moment on, I wanted to learn more about the world. I wanted to learn how could you work with someone when you don't even speak the same language? How is that even possible? And I think this is sort of the seed on international relations. But going back to Africa, my father, though African American, is very much about this life, and very much so. My father was with Students Against Nonviolence. My father was very much part of the party movements that pushed the United States in the 60s and 70s. So in the house, we grew up knowing we were not just black, but we were Bantu. So I think growing up in that kind of environment, it's hard to sort of not always know where you're from and where you should be going to. And I grew up in West Africa. I grew up in Cameroon. And I saw the reality up close. And I think that when you stay in the continent and you come to the West, it's really hard for you to sort of like go, that was such a long time ago, I'm here. It's really difficult. And, as most of you guys know, if your mom is from West Africa, you have an African household. So I might have been in America, but my household was very much Cameroonian, okay? The Americans stopped at the door. So that's how all of this came to be. And also, growing up, I watched politics, news shows. My father was very big on these three networks, NPR, BBC, PBS. That was it. I never watched regular television. I had to beg to watch regular TV, and what I did was like sci-fi, like Star Trek,
Right.
all politically incorrect, which with Mr. Meyer, which is all politics,
Bill Maher,
right? Yeah, Bill Myers. So yeah, that's how all of this came to be, and I had great teachers along the way. I had really great teachers from middle school who were like this guy I had, Mr. Halverson. He told me one day, he said, you know what? One day I think you will be the reason why there's no United Nations. Because my political beliefs were always so far right. But he was that teacher who was always like, it's okay. You're going to go to law school or you're going to go study foreign policy. And along the way, I always had teachers like that. I think it's really important that if you're teaching, all the teachers out there, no matter how odd the child is, trying to push them towards that oddity. I'm where I am because of my teachers.
Right.
Yeah.
So your startup is based out of Seoul, Korea.
Yes.
So tell us about why Korea, why Asia, why not like a Hispanic country or Australia, some kind of continent like that? Why specifically Asian?
Because
countries?
those spaces are interrupted. They're interrupted because of slavery. They're interrupted because of colonialism. They're interrupted because of war, right? But when you look at South Korea is a country that was colonized, went through war. They didn't react by being a colonizer or going back to war. They ended up being a global power, right? They're a middle power state. They have a role in our global economy. You have Samsung, you have LG, you have even their flag carrier, Korean Air, that has partnered up with KLM. Outside to you, when you're flying overseas, you don't see that as anything. You just see that as it means I can get here a lot faster, right? But it means a lot for a country's flag carrier because it means that you're now part of the global players.
Right.
When other people can fly your airlines and not worry about it crashing,
Okay.
it means you are now a strategic player. Now you can talk, right? So I was interested in Korea in that sense that we have African states, we have all these 54 spaces that have gone through war, and yet no one has really just sort of stepped outside and become a global player, right? So we have like South Africa, that yes, they have South African Airlines, so Airways, forgive me, but we know South Africa because of the seduction of war. We don't know of South Africa outside of that. That's that Madiba effect, right? So when we think of South Africa, we think of the apartheid regime.
Right.
Forgetting that it was the entire southern Africa, not just South Africa.
Right.
Right. So I was interested in, what can we learn from Korea? What can we learn from Asia as like Africans, right? And how can we apply that to our spaces? Because at one point in time, Ghana helped out Korea.
Right.
Ghana gave them money. Ghana gave them food after the Korean War. So what was so different? How could you have Korea to be where it is now and Ghana where it is now?
Right.
So that's sort of the build-up of SNSEGE. And when I was in school, grad school, I did a paper on South Korean foreign policy. So this is where my interest started to really blossom because I saw that they use soft power. They use middle power diplomacy. They don't use sticks to get their point. They use the idea of, hey, do you want this? How can we work together? Okay, if we cannot work together, our allies might penalize you. Are you aware of this? Okay, we don't have that in the continent. What we have is people coming in, they get the natural resources out, but we don't have a hand to play, right? It's really impossible for you to tell global partners that, well, we feel like blah, blah, blah. No, you don't even have water to drink. You don't have a plate. You don't have a sameness, I'm sorry. Right? So in Africa, unfortunately, we're playing a game that with our former colonizers, we can't win that. You do not get freedom and success and glory as a state depending on your former oppressor. South Korea did not become what it is today because of Japan. Japan was its colonizer. And likewise, the other ASEAN states, the other Asian Pacific states, right? Africa is the only space where we work with our former colonizers for like this form of like of liberty and like influence and power, and it doesn't work that way. So that's why I'm interested in Asia. Okay.
So your company, and is it how many employees do you have?
I may start out Just me.
So it's just you right
Just
now.
me.
You've
If you
been
go
in
to my,
business for how long?
I've been in business now for 2 years.
Okay.
So my first year was just really engagement, right? So I'm going to Korea. Like, first of all, Cameroon is just one of those countries that we don't get the glory. I'm sorry. We're not like Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya. So first of all, people need to know, what do you mean by Cameroon, right? I think the Madagascar movie some years back mentioned Cameroon, and for me, and then the World Cup, origin. Yeah, but nobody really knows Cameroon. Let's just be honest, right? So I had to work on that, like engaging with people and telling them, like, Cameroon is about like the size of California, a little bit off the Atlantic, and it's, you still don't get it, do you? Okay, I had to work on that piece, on getting people to know where Cameroon is, and then working on engaging with the Korean public on, well, what would this look like? You talk about bringing Africa's soft power or African country branding to our space, but how would that look like, right? So finding intersectionality. And the great thing about Africa and Asia, what we have is that we don't have war. We don't have slavery, right? And because of that, who better to understand each other? We know the impact of war more than anybody. It is in our continents that you have all the security issues. It's in our spaces: water security, food security, health issues. We know that better. We know that better than the West. The West will never get this, right? They will never get this. Like, our day-to-day experiences in Africa, Asia, compared to the Americas, North America, specifically the United States, it's very different. Like, children don't worry about, like, parasites in their water.
Right.
Here, you will complain about, you don't want Ozarka, you want avian.
True.
Right.
Choices. So it's very, very different experience.
Yeah.
And so you take the brands of these African
Yeah.
countries under the influence of soft power. You present that.
Yeah. So what we do is we go to like we go to the embassies. We talk to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Like, hey, you know the concept of soft power, which they all do. Soft power is a concept that all countries know about. Soft power and hard power and smart power. So this is not a new idea to them.
Well, and break that down real quick for the audience. I want to make
So
sure you understand.
okay. So hard power. Think of weapons. The bigger the weapons, you have hard power. Soft power is your culture, using your culture to get your point across. And then you have smart power. Very few states have access to smart power. The United States does, right? So we have the weapons and we have the culture, right? So American culture, soft power is Black culture, right? So hip hop, that's our soft power. It might not be said here, but when you leave the United States and people think of American popular culture, it is jazz, it is blues, it is hip hop, Black culture. Hard power are all the amounts of weapons that we have available for anyone who would like to come here and try us, okay? So when you have these two things, this is smart power. Not everybody has access to smart power. Some people have too much hard power. So when we think of the Middle East, they have all that hard power. They do have soft power tools, but they don't access it. They believe to make their point is to throw a bomb over there, right? And when you use bombs to make your point, do you really make your point? Because we just see you as this big bad guy, right? Then you have soft power. Soft power is like Japan. Anime manga. A lot of you guys love anime and manga. You just, oh my god. But you need to pay attention to the characters that you're actually saying out loud. They're all named after Japanese deities, former gods. They're all, if you look at the storylines, it's based on how Japan looks at politics, how Japan looks at war. There is literally a department in their Foreign Affairs department that is meant to push this propaganda. That's soft power. South Korea has K-pop, K-drama. When you watch these Korean dramas, the very beginning of it introduces you to their culture.
Right.
It introduces you to the way their life is. And before you know it, you're in love with South Korea. You know?
Yeah. I definitely want to look more at that as soon as we get back from this break.
And we're back from our break. Again, this is Fresh Perspective, and we're with Fatima. And before that, she was kind of telling us a little bit about soft policy and things like that. So I want to direct this question to you. You said that your startup is based out of Korea, Seoul, Korea, specifically. And so we know current news that the U.S. and Korea's president or supreme leader, right, are kind of having those back and forth talks, or one day they have a meeting, let's say the meeting's off, or whatever. What does that look like for like your company, one, and then two, just kind of like being based out of Korea, working with other businesses or other government entities?
Look, it's a North Korean diplomacy has its own complete different track. It's very important that you do not look at North Korean diplomacy through the lenses of how we look at diplomacy. We look at diplomacy through this concept of international liberalism. This was sort of the conclusion of the Great War, right? So after World War One, after World War Two, these giants who came, who won the war, those who lost the war, decided that this would be the game plan. This is how we're going to work. This is the formation of the United Nations, all these international goals and laws and whatnot. North Korea just does not prescribe to all of that. So it's very important that when we look at Supreme Leader's views, we need to look at it from where he's coming from. He is coming from the Korean War. How did we get the Korean War, right? How did we get there? And what happened at the end? He has some very strong views, obviously, of the West. But it's very important to understand that the current president, President Moon, he is a North Korean. He is a boy who was born in North Korea, whose mom carried him across the border to South Korea. There is no one who is going to understand North Korean diplomacy and politics like this man, President Moon, right? With regards to Donald Trump, the problem with this current administration is that it is so, I think we can all agree, it's rather sporadic in how it goes about things.
Sporadic is a...
Right? So when you have someone like Supreme Leader too, who has some very strong views, and sometimes he can be sporadic. Those personalities do this, right? But as you see, we've already had a second summit that was done outside of the United States being present. This was between Supreme Leader and President Moon. If you're in South Korea on a day-to-day basis, these things do nothing for you, right? Mm-hmm. This is not the reason why you cannot do business in South Korea. In fact, North Korea is going to be open for business. There are certain Asian countries that are advocating for people to go to North Korea to start doing business. So the business piece is fine. You're completely safe in South Korea. And for that matter, I think depending on your passport, going to North Korea is not a problem. If you're from the United States, going to North Korea is a problem. But if you're from Africa, going to North Korea is not a problem. In fact, we have an amazing history with DPRK, Equatorial Guinea, before this current administration. If you go back, just do your research. Equatorial Guinea and DPRK. So read a little bit more about that, and you understand why as Africans, DPRK will never be an issue for you. And if you look at our Lusophone spaces, Angola had a relationship with DPRK for a very long time. There was no hostility there. They did a lot of business. So just look at Lusophone spaces and DPRK to learn more about that. I definitely don't want it to say that I'm pushing DPRK propaganda.
For those who don't know what DPRK stands for.
This is North Korea, the Democratic Peoples of Korea. So North Korea.
So even with that, like now, North and South Korean, like the countries are now kind of like going towards that like kumbaya stage in a sense.
Yes.
Based on what we've seen in the news, that's kind of like that treaty has been there, but they're now implementing it in a sense. So as you're talking about business-wise, you can still do business in either or. You can function.
Again, I think if you're from the West, it might not be the best idea to go to North Korea and do business, right? But if you are from like South America, Central America, Africa, these issues have nothing to do with you. It's very important that you pay attention to the news that you're listening to, and you're able to kind of take the propaganda out. And because if you look at the news daily on Korean affairs, you really would think like this is a war zone, and it's not. If you go to South Korea, people are going on with their lives every day. When I stayed in South Korea, we had moments where, there were the threats of maybe he would let a bomb. And then from Washington, D.C., we felt like they might bomb. But listen, this is all talk. Do not focus on it. It's all static. What you need to know is that if you want to do business in South Korea, it's very much open and available for you. If you want to do business in North Korea and you are from this South American countries, African spaces, you can do business. There's nothing stopping you. So if you have a blue passport, please do not do this. Do not go to North Korea. And actually, you can't go to North Korea since the Trump administration. You can't anymore.
And so I think one of the key things that you kind of touched on in our conversation off camera and even just briefly is the business component.
Right.
And so I really want to give people insight into what does that look like? How does one, since we're in the West, do business in South Korea, what does that look like? And you talked about the different passports, some that are better for certain countries, that different process. And we've actually talked in previous episodes about doing this in Africa as well. And so kind of break some of that down from your vantage point.
Okay, so as an American, doing business in South Korea is, look, you don't have it hard here, okay? We have an amazing relationship with South Korea. We do have some of our largest military bases there, so it's not terribly difficult. There is a center I'll let you guys know about. It's called Seoul Global Center, and Seoul Global Center is really where you want to go to if you want to do business in Korea. They're incredible. They're backed by the government, by different ministries. So depending on what area of business you want to go to, it's completely free. Go there, ask them all the questions you want to ask them. They're available. They also speak like 20 different languages there, by the way, so they can speak to just about anyone. Now, with regards to passports, right? We don't have the best passports in Africa, right? The two most powerful passports we have are Seychelles and Mauritius. The reason why we don't have powerful passports is because if you could think back maybe 10 years ago, a lot of African countries require you to have a visa to go here, to go there. And back then, people were saying, like, this is crazy. Why do you need a visa if you're in Cameroon to go to Equatorial Guinea? Like, why? Right? Unfortunately, we failed. We failed our people. While we were doing all these visa restrictions, we were not growing. Right? We were not growing. So you look at Seychelles and Mauritius, they have a visa-free policy. Look at their economy compared to bigger African states. It's like, you can't even compare it, right? So now we have like Ethiopia. Ethiopia just said they're visa-free, so if you want to visit Ethiopia, so that's awesome. So if you have a strong passport, you can do business anywhere. If you have a weak passport, you can't do business anywhere. So Nigeria, unfortunately, if you go to Asia with a Nigerian passport, it is very difficult. It is difficult because of drugs. About 5 years ago, so a lot of the drug pushers were from Nigeria. 419, we're familiar with that, Nigeria. Unfortunately, because of that, with a Nigerian passport, it's not impossible. It is difficult in the sense that you have to deal with stereotypes. So, are you scam? Are you scam artists? They say that, And even sometimes when they do see African, the first thing that comes out of their mouth is, you're not Nigerian, right? Like, you're not Nigerian, So that's the one country I think that would have some difficulties. In China and Korea, I think you have difficulties. But if you go to Japan, I mean, when you look at hip-hop clothing that's been sold in the streets, Nigerians are doing that. Yeah. So in Nigeria, Nigerians in Japan have a different experience, I should say that. And I think also, too, because they learn the language quicker. And when you learn the language quicker, you can do business. So it doesn't matter what the passport is. So Nigerians, actually, it's said that Nigerians pick up Japanese faster than any other group. Right. So there's a park in Japan called Unyo Park. And if you leave that park, I promise you, it's like being in any other West African space. You hear Pidgin English, Igbo, Yoruba, And and they've been there for years. They've been there 20, 25 years.
Wow.
Yeah, you have this Nigerian Japanese community that is thriving, and the Nigerian men there have married the Japanese women there. So it's also interesting to see that intersectionality. I think one of the most amazing experiences I had is seeing a half Nigerian Japanese kid argue with their father about wanting to eat chin chin, but with a Japanese accent trying to speak pidgin. I thought that was
interesting.
That was really interesting. So if you ever go to Japan, go to Unio Park. I promise you, it's like being back home.
So Raylan, like we got 2 places to go to.
Yeah.
Yes.
Ethiopia.
And that's it.
And then we can go to Japan.
Yes.
Gonna get some chin chin.
Yeah, some chin chin. They have good chin chin in Japan. They have good chin chin. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I think one of the things that there's probably some different perceptions or not the best footing as it relates to how America is perceived in some of these other countries. So you were telling us a story about you, I think, being in London, and you mentioned how people didn't call you African American or say that you were black. They're like, "Oh, you're an American."
Right, your passport. It's only in the U.S. that you're black.
Right.
When you leave the United States, you're your passport. The color of your passport. You're an American, right? And so while I was in England, I was like, I am American, right? So much so that when I went to Korea, I failed to realize the first time I went to a museum, a bunch of like 5th graders just stop and they stare, right? They just stare, and I have my natural hair out, and I don't know what they're staring at. So as they stare, I'm staring too, and so I didn't get it. And then the teacher says, "Oh, it's because you're a foreigner," and I go, "But I'm an American." I totally forgot for a second there that I'm black, right? So in England, you're treated as you're an American. Look, and this is not to minimize or marginalize racism that's there, but honestly, you are known by your passport, and you do have passport privileges. I've been in situations where an American has done something, you should have gone to jail, you should have been arrested, but when they hear that accent and they hear I'm an American, then it becomes, just walk it off. Just walk it out. But any other group will be in jail. They will be beaten. I mean, like flogged. But because you're an American and, nobody wants to hear from the State Department, it's like, oh my goodness.
And I think people don't realize how much power that passport has.
You have a lot of privilege with your blue passport. You can go to over 120 countries without a visa. By the way, we don't have the strongest passport. The person with the strongest passport are Nordic friends. Norway, Iceland, they have a very strong passport, but you have a very strong passport, and you do have privilege with your American passport. It's a privilege to go to another country for 90 days visa-free. As an American, this is what happens in Korea. Stay for 90 days, go to another country, come right back. Really, you can do that on Friday, come back on Saturday, and your visa resets. That's a privilege. That is something that other African diaspora people do not have. Right. If you're from West Africa and you go to Korea, I hope you have your visa in order, because if you leave, you might not be able to come back. But as an American, you can do that.
And I know we're running out of time, and so real quick, where can people follow you? Where can they find more information on you? How can they support you?
Absolutely. So if we're on Facebook, SN Segye, ESESEGYE. We're also on Instagram as SESESEGYE, so SN Segye. And while we're having some technical difficulties, as of next week, my website will be up, which is snsegye.com. ESEAND Segye SEGYE.com. So we're good.
Can you say something in a different language?
Okay. In honor of my second home, which is Korea, I would like to say 감사합니다, which means thank you.
Well, Fatima, we definitely appreciate it. Definitely have to have you come back, because there's so much information we need to get into everything.
Absolutely, I would love to do that.
I'm Ray Shackleford.
And I'm Edidion Obote.
And this has been Fresh Perspective.